I don't know who else. I do know that I would see you on Facebook.
Right.
I would see you on Facebook. And because I knew of that, and I'd been told about you. And somewhere, maybe on Facebook, from something you presented,
I read the Montagnard channel.
Yes, I read your story about your coming and about how you helped start a lot of the Êđê and Vietnamese people who came later after you. Okay, so I'll tell you about myself. I was born in eastern Oklahoma in a Mennonite community and participated in a Mennonite community. This is what was called among the Mennonites a General Conference Mennonite, the perhaps the most liberal Mennonite communities. My ancestors had been people who had traveled Netherlands to Poland, to Russia, to Kansas, and then to Oklahoma. And so we were basically taught sort of standard Anabaptist religion, which a couple of years, when I was small, there was a kind of a movement towards more like born-againism, because that hadn't been part of the Mennonite tradition. And that had a big effect on me, because I would get very frightened when a preacher would say, Jesus may be coming this year. So I was kind of really obsessed with trying to find the truth. When I got out of high school, I had planned to stay home on the farm to help my parents, because my brother, next older brother, he had been in alternate service, and he failed a medical exam, so he was coming home. So they said, well, you can go to college. So I went to a local college, John Brown University in Arkansas, for 1 year. But my brother was also there, and he was taking Greek. And I really wanted to learn the Bible. So I went to Grace Bible Institute in Omaha, Nebraska, where I took Greek for 4 years. And I really enjoyed it. It was the first time, actually, that I had studied a language, because in high school, they had offered German. And being a German, I didn't want to be a kraut, so I didn't study German in high school. So anyway, I get out of there and in 1958, and I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, because I'm pretty clear that I'm not going to be a preacher. I'm not going to be a missionary. What am I going to do? And I was a conscientious objector, and I had been approved for that by my local draft board. And so I checked with the Mennonite Central Committee about where one could do alternative service. And I wanted to go to Africa, because I had a friend in Africa, but they didn't have a space in Africa. So they said, how about Vietnam? I didn't even know where Vietnam was, but I said, okay, I'll go to Vietnam. So I and two other guys, we shipped out of New York in, I guess, August of 1958, and sailed to France. From France, we sailed to Vietnam and arrived there in, I guess it was early September 1958. Spent a day in the MCC house in Saigon.
Yeah. What is MCC?
The Mennonite Central Committee in Saigon, what was then Valentine Street, not by the airport. And then we drove up to Bon Mituit, which is where our destination was. And we had there a medical unit at a leprosy hospital that had been founded by a Christian and Missionary Alliance missionary, and now, of course, was associated with the Protestant Church of Vietnam, the Hoi Thanh Tin Line. And our job there was to build wards onto an existing hospital. And so my one colleague, who was from Indiana, he was a Mennonite who had learned construction with his father. He basically took over the construction. Because I was the oldest in the team, I was sort of made the manager of the unit, which didn't mean much beside having to take care of the finances of the unit. We had a unit we'd have maybe 2 nurses and 3 or 4 guys, and one woman who was our house mother. And then we had a couple of Êđê houseboys who worked with us. And then we had a clinic. We had this leprosy hospital, which had been there before. And then MCC, or the Mennonite Central Committee, had us used old French army barracks and built our own freestanding general treatment clinic. So we had that clinic, and we had our residents, and we were at a leprosy hospital, which had a whole compound, including generators, so you had electricity at night. And the first thing we did was every morning we spent studying the Êđê language. We had this wonderful young woman, Nha Trang. Actually, in the Êđê custom, she's named by the name of her oldest daughter. So her name was Amit Hanina.
Amit Halina.
Amit Hanina. And she and her husband were working with us. Her husband ultimately became a doctor. And she would make up the Êđê language courses on a little copybook. And every morning we'd have class. In the afternoon, we would work. For example, I have a picture of me with a Dodge 4x4 out by the river. We had to get our own sand from making our cement blocks from the river. So I have a picture of myself doing that. And then we had several Êđê guys hired who made our cement blocks. We had forms for the blocks. You make the cement, put it in there, shake it, and then put it off and let them dry. So we made all our cement blocks, made everything. We found a tree, I'm pretty sure it was mahogany, out in the forest that had been cut down illegally, and the guys who cut it down were chased out, and it had been there 5 years already, lying there. Huge one, truck like this big. And the village people said, if you're going to use this to build this hospital, you can have the tree. So we contracted with a team of sawyers, Vietnamese, from Ban Mi Tuot, and they came out, and they cut all of our lumber right out there in the jungle. You know, you'd prop up a log, and then one guy's underneath, the other guy's on top, like this, and then they cut everything, all of the thin pieces for the door panels of the doors and everything. And so we were there. Well, one guy was with us, stayed 3 years. Alan, the one in charge of building, he ended up going to Korea doing building. And I was transferred after 18 months. I was transferred to Saigon to be the interim director of our entire program in Vietnam, because we hadn't been able to get a replacement director. So I moved to Saigon. I lived with a Vietnamese family in Saigon for a year and a half. But I always kept my contact with Ban Mi Tuot because we learned Êđê quickly. Within 6 months, I was working as interpreter in the clinic in Êđê English, because our nurses tended to all work in Êđê, but when we'd get a doctor come in for a short term, we'd have to have somebody who could translate. So we all got to love the Êđê language, and of course the Êđê people that we worked with. The leprosy program was really pretty complicated because the leprosy, has been treatable for many, many years. But it's also very contagious. And so some people are on treatment and their level of infection is down enough to where they could go out and live in the villages. And some of them, we had a leper village. Some of them were living right there with its own church, the leper village. And of course, we would hear them play their flutes at night. And that was just right next to our own homes. And then those who were out in the villages, we would hold mobile clinics in about 4 or 5 different villages, once a month for each village. And we'd go out there with a Land Rover that was equipped with cabinet with all kinds of medicines, including injections if we needed them, medicines for malaria, and including additional medicine for the leprosy patients. And that then continued after I moved away. While I was there, we had, that is the Mennonite Central Committee, we were working closely with the Vietnamese Protestant Church, the Hoi Thanh Tin Light. So we had agreed to help them to start a hospital in Nha Trang. They had a site, a beautiful site in Nha Trang, right on the beach. It's an incredibly beautiful site that belonged to the Evangelical Church of Vietnam. And they wanted to use that site. We actually didn't want to build there because it was nearby the city. We thought it would be better to be out country somewhere. But they persuaded us that if we built the hospital there, we could do mobile clinics around Nha Trang. And that's what we did. But anyway, we had this young woman who was coming, a nurse. She was going to be the first nurse at that hospital in Nha Trang. And since I was the leader of the team, I'm the one that has to go out to meet her when she arrives on the DC-3 at the dirt airport and brought me to it. And of course, all of the rest of the staff wanted to go. So we had this big van full of people, and we were late. And that story never ends in my family, because if my two boys were here, they would, oh, he was an hour late. Well, as it turns out, I finally found her letters, all the letters she had written home to her family. She said they were 5 minutes late. But anyway, I remember her sitting out there all by herself on the bench in that old airport when we got there. And this woman, her name was Elnora Weaver. She later became my wife. Now, we ended up actually working as colleagues at that site for a year until she was transferred to Nha Trang, and we actually started the hospital in Nha Trang, and I was transferred back to Saigon. And we didn't really date or anything much until after we separated. But then when we came home, we got married in 1963. And she was able to be there to help start that hospital, which that's a whole nother story. But it didn't have anything much to do with the mountain people, except that some would come there from time to time because there were Rhade people living not too far outside of Nha Trang. However, there was one case where in the Ziling area, among the Kafon, there was and this is written up in a story. My goodness, I'll get the name for you. Where the Viet Cong were starting to come. They started really about 1958 when they started to show up. And the Viet Cong were coming into the villages and harassing them and telling them that you have to make the bamboo stakes, that they would put in the booby traps. You have to make them for us out in the forest. But these Rakah people instead were building for themselves boats out of bamboo, the huge bamboo that's round and empty and floats very well. And so they were making themselves floats back in the jungle, and telling the Viet Cong when they'd come, when they're doing their work that they're supposed to do. And then one night, things were getting really bad. I don't remember just exactly when that was. They all got on those rafts, got on the river, and 3 villages worth of Kaha people floated down the river, down to Nha Trang, and ended up at Nha Trang, right near where the old citadel is for the Nha Trang. And this hospital in Nha Trang then, that was one of their mobile clinics because they could serve those people there. And that's a whole story in its own right. It's really a fantastic story. And it has been written up in a book.
Okay.
So anyway, so then I'm in Saigon, and I get to Bami a lot. I don't get to use the Êđê language much anymore. And we come home, we get married in August of 1963. Eldora had, in the meantime, after she got home, she had gone to Kentucky to become a nurse midwife, trained as a nurse midwife, and because she was always interested in obstetrics. And so then I was intending to do PhD research in Vietnam on the relationship between the lowland Vietnamese and the minorities. But there was no way to get money for me to do that. I knew about what was going on. Cornell University has a fantastic library. I knew about Gerald Hickey, of course, and I knew about Gordon and with Laura Smith, who had started the work there. In fact, I had met them. And all of this stuff I could find in the Cornell Library. Now, I was funded with a fellowship for Vietnamese language study. So I'm studying Vietnamese language. I'm working on getting a PhD. But I end up having to do my research for the PhD in the Philippines because I couldn't do it in Vietnam. However, in June, after the Tet Offensive in 1968, then she and I had agreed that we would be available to spend the summer in Vietnam, and she would serve as a nurse at the hospital she had helped to start, and I would do a research with the mountain people about what their needs were that the Mennonite Central Committee, might be able to meet. So then the Tet Offensive happened, and of course she couldn't go, but I did. And so I was there for about 2 months in 1968, traveling all over, everywhere where I could get in touch with leaders of the mountain people, Ziling and Baulak Kaha. We were in Dalat with the Kaha, and then Banmituit with my old friends in Êđê, and then to Pleiku, Kontum, and Dakto. You think those is all of them. And at that time, these people all had papers for travel, even though we were not military. But I had this sheaf of papers, and I could just take one and get on a Huey helicopter to go wherever I wanted to. Mm-hmm. So I traveled all over in C-123s and C-130s, all of these places. One time, I was traveling back, I think it was from Pleiku to Saigon, I don't remember exactly, but anyway, it was a C-123, and there was only three people on it. The pilot and the co-pilot and me. Pilot comes over to me and he says, "Where you want to go?" I said, "Well, we're going to Saigon, aren't we?" No, I said, "We can go wherever you want to." So, no, we did go to Saigon. But that time, by that time, many of the mountain people had been forcibly moved to be near their larger cities. So there were these, and I got pictures of these whole communities of tin roofs, these long lines of tin roof houses where they were living away from their fields, where they had been forced to move. From the history that I've learned, forced first by the Viet Cong coming in, especially over toward Laos on the west side, where the Viet Cong would start coming into the villages, and then the people would move. Mm. And then later forced also by the South Vietnamese and by the Americans so that they could be in safe places. Now, people will also say, and it's true, that they were being moved from their villages for the bombing. But that's true, but it isn't the main reason, because the main reason the moving happened very early before there was any bombing. The main reason was to get them away, because the North Vietnamese would come in, or the Viet Cong would come in, and simply depend on them on the rice, which in official documents it says they voluntarily gave away, but which, of course, were being just taken from them. And sometimes even their houses would be torn down and used to build bunkers. But anyway, that I wrote a report. One thing that is now in my memory or in my recollection about stuff, very important, and that is that we never understood the system of agriculture, of at least the Êđê people. And I have it from Lapsio also, that Terai was probably the same, and I'm sure it must have been. I don't know how far to extend it, because I've also done work on the mountain people up in Quang Ngai, Quang Nam, and I don't know whether they shared exactly the same kind of farming system. But we didn't understand that system. And we were asking them about, whether we could help you in agriculture somehow. And as I think about it, I almost have to laugh, because we didn't understand anything about what they were doing anyway. But by that time also, they couldn't go to their fields anyway. So they couldn't use their system anyway. But anyway, I remember from that trip, I remember that we all thought the leaders would say, among other things, we need to help in agriculture. They never did. What they always told me was they need help in education, and they need help for their children, because they're concerned by then already about the children getting on drugs. And I don't know whether anything that I reported was ever used. I do know that after that, the Mennonite Central Committee did send out some agriculturalists, and they did work with people like in Pleiku, and I know in Ziling, and Balak in agriculture. But it would be a completely different agriculture from what they had before, because all you just have to have a little field somewhere that was a permanent field, and most likely you would raise paddy rice, which they didn't. Very few of them did before. So then I came back, and then in 1997, I had a friend who had he had been a youth minister in our Methodist church. He had gone to seminary at Duke, and he was on the faculty or on the youth ministry. The ministries of Virginia Tech at Blacksburg, the campus ministries, and he and his friends had started doing work camps in Nicaragua. And at that time, there were Russian young people who could come from Russia with government money to come to America to work camps. And so they were doing work camps. And they got sick with work. They were infected with the work camp idea. So he wanted to do work camps in Vietnam. And he found a friend in Houston, Texas, who had been in Vietnam, who was fluent in Vietnamese, who was already working on a work camp program, bringing youth to Vietnam. And so we connected in 1997. He and I went back. We connected with this group that then called itself the Viet Youth, and later became the Vietnam YMCA. And so then for 10 years, every year, we would go and do a work camp. I always wanted to try to do one in Ban Ma Thuột, because we could have, I thought, got the Êđê from the Êđê church and the Vietnamese from the Vietnamese church to collaborate and do a work camp at that leprosy hospital where I had been done. But we never did. I don't believe that we ever did a work camp with with the mountain people. In fact, when I was there in 1997, I met with a lot of the folks we had known before, stayed in the hall with Amenina and Bunale, just outside of Bonmituit. And her brother-in-law was a pastor, Mahabil. You may have heard of Mahabil, Isiok. He was a pastor there. He's still living, as far as I know. And and they told me then that there were lots and lots of Christians among the Êđê and Vietnamese people. And they told me then it could be as much as 70%. And I said, why? Because I know it wasn't anything like that before, when I was there before. And they told me something I will never forget. And that is, the Vietnamese people hate us. The Vietnamese government hates us, and you abandon us.
Right.
And that was heavy, because in fact, now I don't think when they said that to us, they particularly meant we had abandoned them. But we did in fact, because in 1975, when everybody left, all the Americans had to leave, Americans and Canadians. We always had a lot of Canadians. Then they all left. And then in 1992, the Mennonite Central Committee was able to come back to Vietnam, but they never went back to work with the mountain people. And I visited them there a number of times in Hanoi, because I was back every 10 years at least. And I would tell them, these are the people with the greatest need in this country. Why in the world? And they would tell us what I knew was true, and that is politically sensitive. The party will not let us even go there. Yeah. And that was, in fact, the situation. But it's still, to me, painful, because until this day, there are a number of people who had worked, like most of the people who worked there with me are gone. But there are a number of people who had worked with the Kohoa in Sealing, and some, at least one who had worked in the hospital in Pleiku. And they, from time to time, will report that they tried to contact some of their people that they'd worked with and have found it to be extraordinarily complicated. Now, me, when I was back in 1997, I guess, yes, 1997, we were actually able to go out to the leprosy hospital. Two of the Hachia's children, two boys, took us out on their motorbikes. We got out to the hospital. It was still operating. There was an Êđê in charge, but we were told that we should not have been there, that they might get in trouble. On the way back, we stopped at the highway that's coming into Bonmituit from the south, or actually south. Anyway, from the south, I guess. And where the church had been, the Êđê church was still, the building was still there. And also the place where the missionary houses had been. And those missionary houses are completely demolished. And I knew that these several missionaries, I think, was it 3 or 4 of them who were killed there. I knew that where they, more or less, where they'd been buried, which wasn't really a burial. I think the bodies were just dumped into a pit. Mm-hmm. So I take my camera out. I'm going to take a picture. The police come out of the woodwork. Oh, my. And you have a permit to take a picture? No, I don't have a permit. Well, we're going to have to take you to the police station. There's a little Vietnamese kid. He pulls on my sleeve. He says, "Sir," he's talking to me in Vietnamese. He says, "Sir, you just give him the film. Just give him the film. And leave you alone." So I opened the film, took the film. The kid says, "Just tear off the part." I lost all my pictures, but they let me go. So, elephants. How about elephants?
That's great.
You know that there used to be a huge international trade in elephants. In fact, what people don't know generally is that that whole part of the country, from there out to the coast over during the Cham era, what is now Hoi An, was an ancient port. The Portuguese called it Faifo. Way back when, there was a huge international trade coming into what was South Vietnam. A good part of that was exotic products, timber, and elephants coming from the highlands. And there were wild elephants out in the forest nearby us. So one day, the village people came over and they said, the elephants are tearing up our gardens. They didn't usually do that. So what can we do? Well, we had a 12-gauge shotgun, a very nice gun. And we also had some of these single ball, not rather than the little babies, shotgun, one single lead ball. So we thought maybe that we could frighten them away with that. So we're staying far away. We don't want to get close to this. And we shot at the elephant a couple of times and drew blood, but didn't leave. So they were still hanging around toward evening, tearing up the gardens. So we went and got firecrackers. We thought we might chase them away with firecrackers. And so I, like an idiot, because it's getting dark, I climb up one of the trees because I want to get a picture of them. And all at once the elephants, it sounds like they're charging us. I don't know it. The other guys all run. I'm sitting up in the tree. But nothing happened, and I was okay. The next morning, the villagers came over, and they said that the one elephant was a female, and she delivered her calf out there in the field. And they told us, well, probably that's the reason they were here. They told us probably she had been a tame elephant, and probably when she came time to deliver, her instincts brought her to the village, and she had her calf out there. But it was out in the open. The sun was hot, and by 10 o'clock that morning, apparently, the baby died. And then she went crazy. And she was trumping and going around and around. We finally sent a message into to Bon to it to have a police come out. But of course, by the time they got out, they were gone. Then, and I don't remember whether this was before that or after that, we would often have people coming to our clinic on Elephant Act. And one day, the villagers came and they told us, we had a village real close by, Bun Kla, real close by. Villagers came and told us there are elephant hunters here. And they were coming from up near Laos. And these are people who hunt, and they will ride on a tame elephant and ride into the herd of the wild elephants and isolate a young one till they could isolate it until they can get it away, and then get a lariat or something around a foot and get it tied to a tree and tied to another tree, and then they'll tie it between elephants, they'll walk it out, and then they have it for sale or whatever. So that's what they told us. They're out there. Well, 2 days later, or maybe 3 days later, a guy from the village comes again. He said, hey, the elephant hunters are out here on the road, and they want to talk to you. So I went out there and talked with them, and they said, we had a misfortune. A couple of our tame elephants got in a fight, and one gorged the other one, and we're pretty sure that the spirits don't want us to be here. That they would always have done a number of ceremonies before, at least one chicken leg or something like that before, because this stuff is dangerous. And now they had decided that because of their violating something with the spirits, they had to get out of there, and they wanted to sell this elephant. And they said, we will take it to the village, we'll tame it, we'll get it ready to work, and then we'll bring it to you. $60.
Oh, wow.
Of course, I had no way to put an elephant in my suitcase. And I don't believe we ever seriously discussed, because the Leprosarium probably could have benefited from having an elephant to work for them. But now, my wife, she wasn't my wife yet, but she would be willing to try anything. And we did quite a bit of hunting. I didn't, but one of the guys did, especially deer, hunting deer out in deer, and also peacock sometimes. For Thanksgiving, we'd often have peacock. But one day, one of the villagers came over and said that we think there's deer out there, and we're going to probably get an elephant and go out deer hunting. And she had always wanted to go deer hunting on an elephant. And there was another one of the women that was there, and so they both agreed, and they were going to go deer hunting. And they did, and they didn't get anything, but they spent the whole night sitting on the back of the deer through the night, going through the basically not forest, more or less the tall grass, the tall grass. And they had seen one, but they hadn't gotten anything.